Okay, so let's focus in on the systems and install pieces of Zowe, and over to you, Jack.
Thank you so much, Rose. So I realized before I start introducing the new command, the new features, like this page showing up here, and probably I should start with the motivations why we made these changes, and why we do that, and what's the goal we want to achieve. So in version one, you may already notice we have many utility scripts, and each of the scripts located into different locations in different directories, and each of the script may have a different command line arguments. So some use -h, some use -l, some use -i, etc. It's not very consistent, and the location is also not very consistent. So the help is also very limited. So we are thinking this is one of the approach we try to do is we make it a consistent feeling for the end user when they use the Zoe install server command, and they always can expect what can be used, what options can be used, and what cannot, and what are the options, etc. So all those informations you can get it directly from the command itself, and it's optional. You can go to the docs website, but you don't need to keep go back and forth my console and my web browser and to go over the documentations. So that's one of the motivation. Another motivation is we try to solve some of the problems in version one. So in version one with Zoe evolving, we added a HA high availability support, and we added a containerization support, etc. So that end up we have two passes to configure Zoe. Yeah, originally, we have an instance env, we use environment variables, and with high availability, we introduce new configuration called Zowe.yaml to configure Zoe. In version 2, we try to consolidate that. So you have one consistent way, and it works for all the use cases, all the users scenarios of Zoe. Whenever you want a high availability or not, or you want to deploy into containerization containers or not. So you have the same experience. So that's another motivation. So let's back to the first important feature. This is a new feature we introduced in version 2. There's a new server command, we call it a ZWE. And so we try to balance the simplification and the flexibility on install and the configuration. So the ZWE command, you can, if you configure edit to your path, you can always access it from anywhere. And all the uh, utility tools and the commands, how you install, configure, install components, etc., all comes from this command. And there's a consistent -h option. You can use whenever you feel lost, you just type ZW-H or ZW-help, you will get help messages. So you can do it anytime. Another consistent is the log directory. And if you are doing automation, you wanted the console log to be written to somewhere, we have a consistent option applies to every ZW command. You can do -l or -log directory, log dir to point where you want to write the logs. That may help you on your automation. There's two more. They are not mentioned here. I found it's very important to work with different people try it out. Version 2 is -v. -v, another option is same as -debug, and another one is -v, and it's equivalent to -trace. It provides two different level of debugging logs. So if you enable the trace, you probably see it's quite annoying because it's talking too much. But the benefit is it gives every uh, output of almost every command you run. ZW command run in the middle, so it will help you to understand why it fails. Uh, Another one is we also provide a shell function library. So in the past, some of the functions we provide as utility tools. So you may remember there's a scripts validated scripts located in the /scripts directory. And also there's some other utilities already converted to functions. So in version 2, almost everything we we put into a function library. So that means if your component or extension running inside Zowe, those function library always available to you. So you can use any of them, and then we try to well documented every function what's the purpose, and just remember some of the functions we marked as experimental or internal. So just try to keep away from that but it's okay if you know what it's doing. So the install configuration changes. So during install, there's one big change is in the past, when we do the install, we install to a separate directory. In version 2, after you extract the convenience build, you get right away what is the runtime directory. You can use that folder directly as your runtime directory, and you don't need to call Zoe will not copy to another directory. So not just saving your space on the server, so it's just also much easier. So mentioned earlier, so we use a Zoe.yaml file to configure Zoe. So that's the only option, consistent option you can works for all the use cases of Zoe. So we try to automate the Zoe configuration. So that as much as possible. So in the past, we do several steps. If you go through version 1 documentation, after Zoe -install.sh, you probably need to run Zoe configure instance, and you probably need to install MVS. You probably need to run configure stc, etc. So all the steps. In version 2, we try to consolidate them and with a single ZW init command. So this ZW init command actually behind the scene will run several steps. And those steps you can run individually if you know other steps I don't really need. So for example, I just want to update my STC configuration, you can go directly ZW init STC. If you go ZW init, it will try to run everything, configure everything for you. There's another option may be important is we have a security dry run mode. So that means if your account, your install user account does not have the permission to run some of the security setup, like the permit command, the create user command. So there's an option to you can pass with the ZW init is a security dry run. With the security dry run, we will not perform those commands, but instead we prepare a GCL for you. That GCL you can pass to your system programmer and let them to run for you. So that is GCL. We also customize everything already with the what you put into Zoe.yaml. So pretty much that GCL is ready to run. It consistent with what you have defined in Zoe.yaml already. So in the past, another complaint we heard is if you use Zoe configure, install, and configure, you must do it on USS. And in some of the steps, like the GCLs, you have to switch to TN3270 and run the GCL. So in version 2, we try to do it consistently. So in version 2, you will be able to run every configuration from USS. You don't need to switch back to TN3270 except there's a required for example, you need to run security, you don't have permission and someone else run for you. So everything should be accessible from USS. And we also investigate another way to configure it's a non-USS way. So if you are using PTF, you are already on TN70, and we are trying to do everything within teens of 70, you don't need to switch to USS at all. So that's another path we are trying to investigate. Yeah, thanks, though. Thanks, Rose. So I put some demo here. So how it looks like. So first part on the left is extract the Zoe convenience build right away, and you will see a runtime directory looks like this. There's a few important files like readme.md. I hope the current v2 readme more providing more information to help you start with Zoe. So actually, we don't have, we are working on the V2 documentation right now. This README may help many people already to install Zoe version 2. So another information is we call it developers.md. So that helps if you are a developer and you are not using Zoe launcher, etc., to start Zoe, what you can do with this, or you don't want to use ZWSVSTC as a runtime user. I want to use my own user account, what I can do. So those are information we put into the developers.md. And on the right side, there's an example of dash edge. So anywhere you tap ZW-edge, you get a help message like this. What are the global parameters? I was talking earlier. So you have the dash debug, you have dash trace, you have log directory. Very important that you have a dash C. Sometimes it's optional. Sometimes it's required based on the command. It points where your YAML configuration is. And the following, there are all the sub commands available. And if you type ZWE, for example, certificate dash edge, you get that command, help message of that command. So the lower is an example of a ZW version. So if you just type ZW version, it tells you it's version 2.0.0. And if you type ZW version -v, it gives you two lines, a little bit more specific, what's the build and hash, commit hash of this build. Another option is you type W, and it also tells you where the ZW command is located. So in my case, it's /var/zoe/runtime.
Just want to respond quickly to the chat. Are you showing something besides the one slide? And the answer is no. We're just walking through what's on the Zoe command demo slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Rose. This page, we gave a quick example how Zoe.YAML, the YAML configuration looks like. So in the version 2, Zoe.YAML, we provide an example -Zoe.YAML. You can create your version of Zoe.YAML based on this. So we're trying to improve this to make it more user-friendly or more understandable. And another approach we are investigating is working on is we're trying to apply a JSON schema. So that will help you to understand what's the field, what's the available field that I can configure, and what's the options, and how we should change it, and is my changes valid or not. So like on the left side, it's Zoe -setup, .setup. On the right side, they're showing some runtime directory configuration and the log directory. We try to giving more reasonable commands for each of the configuration entries. So just a quick recap. So Zoe.setup is most likely to help you to install and init Zoe. So when it's in the runtime, Zoe.setup is not used. So if you already configured everything and you don't need to the Zoe.setup section. Okay, can go next page. So here's a more command demo. So this is a really quick how you run the ZW init command. So what I did is I use ZW init -- config point to my Zoe.YAML, and I passed the option allow overwritten. So some of the datasets or files can be overwritten during the init. And I also passed option saying the update config. That means some of the configuration during the init step will write back to Zowe.yaml to help me to configure. So especially we have a Zowe dot setup dot certificate section. So that's how instruct Zowe how to set up certificate. But for the runtime, Zowe.certificate, how to configure that update configure option will help you. It will always give you the correct setup based on your setup. Okay, I think we can move to next page. So if you see Zowe is configured successfully, that means everything really works and you can move on to start Zowe. So that means for this version 2, pretty much ZW install and the ZW init are the only command you need to do on the console. And after this is done, and you are right away be ready to start Zowe. Okay, let's see next.
Okay, Jack, just in context here, a question came in through chat. Workspace directory example still had the word instance in the path. Is that deliberate?
Oh, yes, I will fix that. That seems not correct. And I potentially have a typo there. I will fix that. So instance, that's another breaking change. I will talk about it later. So the instance directory will change to workspace directory and the log directory.
Great catch, Robert. Thank you for that. Okay.
Thanks. So I mentioned earlier, so we have a rich collection of shell library functions. So every function is defined similar like on the right side, and we try to document it and what's the parameter, what's the input, and what are the input and what's the response, or what are the output. So eventually we expect, we're trying to automatically generate the reference document and put onto the docs.zowe.org. So, and we also try to automatically test all the functions on ZOS, USS, in the Ubuntu and Red Hat. So that's what I'm planning to do. And in version 2, we also document every global environmental variables. So we have a dedicated section, so showing what are the variables we created during the Zowe runtime, and what you can use and what you are not suggested to use. So everything start with ZW private. That's potentially something we are not suggesting to you to use, but everything else is available there, and all the components and extension can use them right away. So everything, another point is everything defined in the Zowe.yaml. It's also automatically have a matching event variable. So there's automatically matching pattern. We will explain how it works. Besides this, besides the shell library functions, we also try to do something, improve something from version 1 is we try to standardize the usage of std out and std arrow. So every time you see an arrow, it will goes to std err. And if you see information or just the regular log, it will show up in std out. Another part is, so this is a more shell function programming compliance. Another part is we're trying to return proper exit code. So if you see an error happens, it should return with exit code non-zero. So that's what we're trying to improve. Okay, we can go next page. So here's examples, almost list the major commands we are trying to use in version 2. So we have ZW install, we have ZW init. ZW init has 6 sub commands, and we run them in this sequence. And we have ZW start and stop. And for components extension install, we have a ZW components install and enable and disable. Sorry, I have a typo there. We have also provide a utility tool ZW certificate. So that's a generic certificate utility to manage PKCS 12 key store and or ZOS keyring. So those are not band related to Zowe.YAML. It's a very generic utility, and you can also use in your own command or shell script. And we want to provide two migrate scripts. One is we migrate from version 1. So that means if you pass your version 1 instance env, we will give you a Zowe.YAML for you. So this is the migrations. Another one is a migration for Kubernetes. So that means I have a Zoe running on ZOS. I also want to run on Kubernetes. And so this is another command to help you to convert Zoe.YAML. And the more tools we want to provide to help you diagnose the issues. Okay. So pretty much that's ZW commands. So all the related to ZW commands. And another feature of changes for version 2 is all the components and the extensions now must define and manifest.YAML to tell Zoe how it works and how it interacts with Zoe runtime or other components, etc. So this is a mandatory, and you may also see this information in the V2 conformance. The manifest help you to define how to register to APML and how to register on the Zoe desktop as an app server, and whether it's a Java extension or whether it's a ZIS plugin, etc. So all the definitions we can find from this centralized manifest.YAML. And we will also working on a schema, JSON schema to help you to validate this. Another big change, this is not existing in version 1, is we allow the component to define their own configs in the manifest.YAML. The purpose of this new config section is in this section, you can show to the end user who really uses Zoe what are the configurations you can put on this, you can change for this component. You can also define a default value if the user doesn't change it, and it will fall back to the default value. And everything defines here and is compatible with the high availability. So with this change, we are not really suggesting you to use environment variables to configure your component, because environment variables sometimes may have conflict with high availability. You can only define one set of value, but for different instances, it's very hard to customize. But this config section is compatible with high availability. Every component can have a different configuration value in every LPAR, each LPAR, or each Zoe instance. We have another change in version 1 on the data sets. In version 1, you probably see SCWE sump and SCWE auth two data sets. In version 2, we have one actual, we call it SCWEXEC. It has a few utility tools that we put there to help us to install and configure Zoe. So it's just the two utility tools. So that's and for another change is so that part of change is comes with Zoe runtime. If you install Zoe, and you will see this data set. Another part of the change is we try to separate the user data sets, user customized data sets from Zoe runtime, Zoe data sets shaped by Zoe. So this is the best practice in version 1 we suggested, recommended, but in version 2, this is a more explicit. So you have the option to define what's the parm lab, what's the load lab or of your or JCL lab of your Zoe.YAML, and the ZW init command will prepare those data sets for you. So that means your configuration, your member of PalmLab will stay in your customized dataset. and your original dataset will be kept as is, and it will not affected by Zowe upgrade. Okay, I think this.
Jack, question related to the manifest YAML.
Yep.
If the manifest YAML is key
Mhm.
for know what components are there, how, quote, live, in other words, dynamic, can we be? Sorry, it just jumped. Can we be about adding components / plugins without restarting the Zowe server?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. So we try to investigate. I think it's possible to restart Zoe without
Rose, that's a really interesting question. I'm trying to work on some of the, the standard way too that the, Zoe will sew together all the configurations and check them against the manifests. And what, if I understand right here, you're saying is that you don't want to incur a shutdown to upgrade a component and it's such that it might have a new parameter in its manifest. You want to stay alive while that upgrade occurs. Is that what you're saying?
That seems to be the question, but I would need Robert to verify.
Let me unmute.
Sorry.
Like, this is... Yeah. Well, I'm also thinking about in terms of installing new components. If somebody's using a Zoe for something mission critical and they want to install a new component, don't want to have to restart the Zoe in order to add a new component.
Since you mentioned plugins being a ability of the desktop, I think the answer isn't solely within the server infrastructure, but rather that we need to look at each of the components and say, for this component, it has an extension capability. Is that extension capability something that can be hot plugged? And I think we'll need to tackle that one component at a time, perhaps.
Oh, I was thinking one level back from that. Yeah, I'm not thinking about you're referring to the Megamon.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying we have a feature in version 1. There's a button on the desktop that says refresh applications.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yep,
and it will scan for new plugins. That feature,
right? Each running server, Sean, is what you're saying here is that if this was the node server, it has a way of refreshing.
Yes,
but
I got you.
So we will need to do a comprehensive evaluation to figure out what our feature set is per server.
The ZSS would need a new feature that if it were a CDLL in the back end of the server, it would have to DLL unload and then re-verify the parameters and DLL reload. I mean, it could keep the server up, Rose, but to actually, it's very interesting to totally hot swap.
Well, yeah,
that some services would have to at least momentarily quiesce.
Right. I'm just talking about, reasonable minimization of disruption if somebody's using Zoe, and doesn't, wants to minimize the disruption. Obviously, there's feasibility questions about any degree of hotness, shall we say.
Yeah, okay, because I think that it will be, the closer you are to, things like individual CLI commands or desktop plugins, hot swapping is probably a lot easier. When you get down to the ZIS, the privileged backend server, it's probably going to be harder to hot swap those parts.
My guess is also that the implementation of this would most likely be a non-breaking enhancement that can come over time. So what I would suggest is, if you have a particular instance in mind of doing things at runtime, that would be a good thing to create on our GitHub issue tracker so that the teams can consider it.
Yeah, I currently don't have such a particular thing in mind at the moment, but I'm just thinking in general terms of, somebody gets a Newton or whatever, and they are already using their, their Zoe for something else, and they don't want to have to do it in a maintenance window necessarily. But yeah, some stuff may have to move into the maintenance window, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds like we've exhausted that one
Yep, sorry.
for now. No, it's all good.
It's a really good question. So
Mhm.
maybe we can discuss more in the architecture call in the future. It's a really good topic. So this is the example of how the packaging manifest looks like. So you may already know this is the YAML format, but actually you can put a manifest.json here, use a JSON file, just based on your preference. So in this manifest file, there are several big sections. So you may see name, ID. So these are the general information. And there's a command section and the command start and validate. If you work on version 1 conformance, you may already see familiar with these lifecycle scripts. So in version 2, in manifest, you can specifically define where they are. In version 1, I think the name are hard-coded. Also, in version 1 conformance, we say these lifecycle scripts are suggested. In version 2, so we phrase a little bit different. So we say manifest is required. And in these commands, everything are optional, even the start is optional. So based on your configuration, what kind of plugin it is. So for example, this is just a desktop plugin, app server plugin. It doesn't really need a start command. So start command can even also be, but if you enable this component, and it will still be configured by Zowe runtime. So your plugin will still be enabled just without start command. There are also other sections telling the APML services, etc. And we have the app framework plugins definition also. So we have a full documentation what are supported in this manifest. And you can see there's a simple example how the configs section looks like. You can put whatever structure you prefer under the configs. You can deep embed it at different level of group your configurations. So that's all works. If you check a gateway component, you may see the configs are quite complicated. We have a lot of configuration entries for Zowe core components. Based on this example, you can always access this configuration with ZWE configs -- port. You can see all the configs are prefixed with ZW _configs, and the port is what you defined in the manifest config section. So for example, if I have a config called a.b, and you will have an environment variable called ZW _configs _a_b. So that's your environment variable to read how the user configured your component. Okay, I can go next. So this is a introduction how we reorganize the datasets. You will see on the right side we have a shipped with Zowe. We have SCWE3 datasets, and all the other datasets I prefix with cast. So that it's up to you. So you can define pick whatever name you like. Applies to your system. So I use ZWV2.cast for all my customized datasets. JCL Lab, Palm Lab, ZWSALL is for API for authorized programs shipped by Zowe. And the ZWSAPL is for API authorized program from extensions. So those two will be API authorized during ZW init command. Okay. We are working on more features, and it's very interesting, and I believe it's very helpful to the. So one big change is we want to introduce Palm Lab. So as I mentioned earlier, we want to introduce a new way, not USSW, and the Palm Lab will be the central part of it. You don't need a USS file Zowe.yaml to configure Zowe. Instead, you can define it in a Palm Lab. This is a more ZOS traditional way, and we want to support this. And so this, and another one is we want to improve the Palm Lab and also the Zowe.yaml to support multiple configurations. So multiple YAML configurations will be concatenated and will be worked as a overall and telling Zoe how to start. Also, we are working on JSON schema, so mentioned a few times earlier. So the JSON schema will help you to validate, help the end user to Zoe to understand if the user configuration is correct. And this schema can also work with the VS Code extension, and you can modify Zoe.yaml with this JSON schema. It tells you what's the suggest value if you are doing correct or you're doing wrong right away. So basically, with all the improvements, our goal is we try to identify all the breaking changes as early as possible. And during through all the V2 lifecycle, your component, if you build on top of version 2.0 let's say V2 LTS, your component will work all the way to all the V2 lifecycle. So.
Jack, I'd like to add a couple things. Really appreciate that. This is one of the first rollouts for the larger user community here of some of the design for V2, and I appreciate very much bringing all this out. So I'd say that I want to say multiple YAML files are concatenated, and I'd say that they're merged correctly more than just merely concatenated, right? That we really mean that, like, if some piece of this configuration came from a more specific area and then something else came from a more general area that was defaults, they're put together and sewn together with respect to the schema. It's not as I think that we'll end up with something more than just text include. I think it will be, that if one file was saying particular to a particular Kix tool, it would go and bring in some parameters just for that Kix instance and particularize that Zoe instance to match up with it. It wouldn't be, the same. And also to address a question that came in from Madeline Dudek, just as I was talking there, the source of the parameters we're hoping can be either in the parmlib syntax or in the YAML syntax. We think most of the Zoe base components, the Zoe infrastructure itself, will probably, more often be in the YAML, but the customization of the specific, more ZOS-centric tools, there'll probably be parmlibs that overlay information into the particular ZOS-oriented things that come in there. So, again, we have to go and make a demo in a few weeks of showing, how this is merged together and how defaulting occurs. And I think to get to, yes, Madeline, I think that in the extreme case, someone could probably point at, not using Zoe YAML and putting everything in parmlib, but we really want to work with the user community to get more sysprogs into reviewing this and say, how far do we push this concept? Do people really want a totally ZOS-ish install here, or they want to be able to be conformant with how they manage their ZOS software? Like, often people put together a golden master build of DB2 and Kix and all the tools they use with it, and then they roll out clones of it to multiple members of their Plex or multiple instances of those servers. And learning how Zoe needs to be conformant with the way people actually manage software, it tends to be not quite the same thing about how, ZOS has always been sort of like a cloud, but a different kind of cloud, and it has a inside out perspective, from what you would do with Docker or Kubernetes. It's not containerized. It tends to be particularized as you use common definitions somewhere and then overlay the common definitions with more particular definitions like you do in the parmlib concatenation. I hope some of that was understandable by some people on the call.
So
Thanks
just
a lot,
to,
Dr.
Sorry, Jack. So I just wanted to read the question to make sure if folks aren't seeing it. If parm_lib is used, could there be cases where Zowe.yaml no longer exists? And I think, Joe, in summary, your answer was yes. However,
Right, meaning I don't know if people would actually do that. Would they keep the base and the common things of their Zowe instances in YAML, but maybe they need to particularize some parameters that are closer to their DB2 or Kix or IMS or their DevOps system, whatever it is there, it might be a mix. And I guess I'd say that it would be like a parm_lib concatenation, but it would also include YAML files and resources on Unix paths as well. So we need to go and show people walkthroughs to really get this, but that's been one of the driving concerns, is that the answer that the configuration can be in one and only one place of one type probably doesn't suit the mainframe until ZOS itself became containerized, and you could just plop down container instances within your ZOS and have it all work that way. But that doesn't seem to be the evolution of Z.
gotcha. Okay.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's I'll try to quickly go through the breaking changes. So because we don't do create a different folder, so in version 2, if you extract the Zowe, and you should pass the px option to preserve the extended file attributes. So this is one change. In the version 1, it's not necessary, but in version 2, this is required. If your extension requires use some utility script in version 1, so this will for sure is changed, and those utility scripts will not exist in version 2. Instead, there's an equivalent ZWE server command you can use. So if you have trouble to matching to find out where it is, feel free to contact us, ask questions in Zowe-dev anytime. ZWSV-STC is the original STC we start Zowe, and this is removed and we replaced with the ZWSL-STC. So ZWSL-STC has a better control on the started tasks. It has, but also there's another change with you cannot use C to cancel Zowe job. You must use a P command to terminate it properly. So the keep command will help launcher to understand and have a chance to kick in and shut down all the address spaces started by Zowe. ZWSL-STC also support modify command. So we will have more details coming with this documentation, how it's gonna work. And as mentioned before, instance env is deprecated. You must use a Zowe.yaml to configure Zowe. So we changed the instance directory. In version 1, instance directory has several directories under it. So with the workspace, with the logs directory, etc., and with the bin directory. In version 2, we ask you to customize 2 directories. One is called log directory and one is called workspace directory. There's no instance directory in version 2, but you can still group them together as you call it instance directory. It's your own choice, but it's not required. The purpose for this change is actually related to some of the consideration like a parm_lib. So in the past, instance directory, you have an instance env, but in version 2, it may not always be there. And Zowe.yaml may not always be in the root, in the home of the instance directory. It could be somewhere else, and we could have multiple. So that's event variables are reorganized to better describe itself. So we have a pattern to convert everything in Zowe.yaml to be an event variable. And in the past, you use some variables like Zowe explore host. That's very commonly used. In version 2, this will be replaced with new variables. We try to provide a better documentation how can you do the migration? What are the old variables? What are the new variables? We will try to provide this documentation. In version 1, we have some IP configurations, so those are removed. And if you don't have a host name or domain name, you can just put IP whenever we ask for host name or domain. So it will work as a host name and the domain or domain. So this mentioned before, so manifest component manifest is mandatory. And any user must use this command to install extension. So this install command will understand how the manifest is defined and do everything automatically for you. We do introduce new V2 conformance. The first part of the conformance is related to the packaging requirement. So the extension must provide a manifest.yaml. It tells Zowe how to install, configure, how to start this extension. And also the packaging format, what kind of format we support, and where the manifest should be located, and what are the best practice to define the manifest. For example, it's good to define a configs entry in the manifest. It's good to define commands install, configure, start, etc. to help Zowe to understand how it works, how the extension works. And it's optional to define a schema dedicated for the config section. So that tells the end user how your configs are gonna work. So if you have a port under the config section, that port should be an integer, etc. So it's optional. You can define that schema shaped with your component. In version 1, we have a containerization. Everything related to containerization, we do have some requirements. For example, the user ID, how the entry point command should be defined in the Docker file, etc. So in version 2, this is an optional conformance if your extension want to support Zowe containerization. If you have a plan to run your extension inside the Zowe cluster, Kubernetes cluster. So those are the requirements, what you need to do. If you follow this, and your extension should be okay to be started.
Yeah, Jack, I wanted to mention there are a couple, there's a comment and a question related to the P versus C.
Yes.
One is very concerned about the must not use C to cancel. Some users may be sloppy. And then the question, have you spoken with folks at IBM about the P versus C to terminate?
Yes,
Can I field that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that the components of Zowe that run on ZOS need to defend themselves better against the different shutdown scenarios, and that you can't really say that everyone will always be good and use P and do an orderly shutdown. And so the resource management, the error handling of some of the things that run on Z need to add some ZOS specific resource management handling and recovery management handling. And there are some examples of that inside the ZIS. That's probably the most robust component in Zowe with regard to handling disorderly shutdown. And so that I don't know when it will go in, but I think there should be an outstanding ticket or epic to go and make sure this stuff becomes more bulletproof. There's some impedance mismatch between the way processes shut down and the way things expect Unix or POSIX to work versus how shutdown and cleanup happens in ZOS natively. And it's something that a bulletproof program does have to attend to eventually. So I hope that helps, Dave.
Thanks, Joe. I think it's also good suggestion. We will consult more people how they think of this. So the motivation behind scene is the P will send a proper signal to Zowe, And so Zowe launcher can intervene and tell all the components to shut down. But with the C, and there's no the chance. So launcher will be killed right away, and all the other components may not be aware of Zowe has been shut down. So that's the.
So is, I mean, it sounds like there was pretty much consensus, obviously, from the Zowe architecture team on this approach. And there were plenty of IBM folks there. So I'm not sure if that answers the have you spoken with folks at IBM.
Yeah, we will try to find more people to consult in
Mhm.
IBM and see if this
Okay.
is a proper.
Okay, so maybe more to come on that. Great. And I see Joe Winchester posted in the chat, folks who want to get hold of Zowe V2 early driver is available with a link. We'll include that in our FAQs. Use the help that's on the link. Use the install as the V2 docs. Site still includes V1 instructions until the doc rewrite is complete. And then information on reaching out to the squad with feedback. There's also a link there, a couple links. Thanks, Joe. All right, hearing none, we will close out office hours. Thank you very much, Jack. Thank you
very
all for
much.
attending.